Hey, how's it going? John here, and hanging out in lovely Grosse Pointe, headed to Caribou. And I thought I would talk to you about something real quick here. I am really blown away at really, really awesome people that have interesting perspectives. I'm constantly, because of the call of Reformation, that's on our life, on our ministry. I'm constantly introducing the topic of the scattering movement and the absentee church and being in position and all of these kinds of things, and it's just really kind of blowing my mind at how many people are just very resistant to that idea. And I'm not sure what to think. So because here's the idea that we need to be together. The Bible says that we need to gather together more as the end draws near. So we have to be together for the sake of getting the job done. Now, it's that comment right there that some people can't understand, and I think it's because we have a wrong mindset of what church is. And so there's this idea that we just gather together for the sake of edification and encouraging one another and teaching and worship and those kinds of things. And certainly that's part of it, but that is not the full scope of the church. The church is a missional organization. It's very, very much like the military, very much so. And the idea is that we equip the saints for the work, for work of the ministry. And so we don't just get together to encourage each other or to develop relationships or to do those kinds of things, but we equip, and a lot of churches equip, but that's all. They just equip. But we equip why? For the sake of working. And so the church is a working organism where we have an assignment that we have to accomplish. So if you're involved in a church that doesn't have an assignment from heaven, a vision that requires people to fulfill, then you need to ask yourself about what's going on. And so, but it's what's blowing my mind is that this idea of calling people to accountability and responsibility and action and these kinds of things. I don't know. I think it's either foreign to people or they're just resistant because they don't like the idea. And we have to figure this out because the church is it's at risk of impotence. The church is called to go and to win the world, and the church doesn't have the manpower to do it. And you can think at a very practical level. Someone was mentioning to me that hey, just have faith and God's going to make everything come together and don't worry so much about people responding to the call. And I just radically disagree with that idea. And it's very easy for us to understand this. Consider a church that has a children's ministry, and they are, they have a plan in place to touch the lives of children, impact them for eternity, and they have teachers and leaders in place. Well, if even one of the teachers doesn't show up because they have a casual commitment, well, then people's lives are bad. I mean, that's just the easy way to say it. People's casual commitment to the church makes other people's lives bad to varying degrees. And so we're kidding ourselves if we think that we don't have any impact on the mission of the church. If there are intercessors who are called to pray for a pastor, to hold up his arms, if they're the ones, to hold up the arms of a pastor, and let's say they don't do it, the pastor's life gets worse. Very, very simple, black and white. If they lift up his arms, the pastor's life gets better. Not only the pastor's life, but the life of the church, the life of the people that they're impacting, and the entire mission. And so it's easy to think that, well, I don't really need to be in position, and I don't need to be on the wall, and I don't need to pray today. for my pastor, well, the reality is because of that, the pastor's life is bad, or worse than it should be. Because of that, the mission is at risk. Because of that, other people's lives are impacted negatively. And so this idea that, well, it just doesn't really matter, we just need to have grace and faith that God's going to get the job done. Well, no, people literally go to hell because people don't respond rightly to what God is calling them to do. And it's just a hardcore reality. There have been times I share examples. There are times that God has spoken to me to do something, and if I would have disobeyed and I would not have been in that position that I needed to be and responded the way I was supposed to respond, very easily, the people that were directly impacted by that could have gone to hell. Very, very easily. And so, some of you might be thinking, well, that's just a heavy burden to place. And, well, it's not. It's a light burden. The Bible says that his burden is light. It's a light burden, but it's not a non-existent burden. People are looking for a non-existent burden. And somehow this idea that just because we're kingdom people, that now everything is easy and light and simple and all of that. Well, I think we need to be careful about that. And the reality is that it's a hardcore issue. The call to the cross is a call to radical cost. I mean, insane cost. And so I just, it's just interesting to me that people actually argue against commitment. They argue against accountability. They argue against responsibility. And there are pastors out there that have been given visions by God, and it's wrong to assume. I talk about this in my book, 6 Enemies of Fulfilled Destiny. It's wrong to assume that just because the vision is given by God, if the pastor has enough faith, that it's just going to come to pass. It's just absolutely not right. In the chapter is called, one of the enemies of fulfilled destiny is a belief in fate. And the idea where everything's just going to come together if we do our part. It's just not the case at all. In order to get my job done, to fulfill my ministry, I need other people to be responsible and to respond, because we're interconnected. And so God will speak to me to lead in a certain direction, and God might speak to 10 other people to support the vision God's given me. And if any of those 10 are out of position, then the mission is impacted negatively. If a children's worker is missing, then children's lives are made worse, or if they're there, children's lives are made better. If people are tithing, then financially the mission of the church is strengthened. If people don't tithe, then the mission of the church is weakened and usually delayed, meaning they can't do the things that God's calling them to do. Because God will, let's say, for example, God speaks to a pastor that the church is to purchase a $1 million property. For whatever reason, God knows that great things are going to happen there. And now the pastor, of course, doesn't have $1 million in his pocket, so he casts the vision. Let's say God, in dramatic fashion, visits 10 people in the night, actually shows up in their bedroom, wakes them up, speaks to them and says, you're participating in this. I want you to give $100,000 to the project. And, well, let's say 9 of the 10 obey, 1 of the 10 does not obey. The pastor cannot purchase that building. Now, does that mean there's not a plan B somewhere? Well, maybe, maybe not. We don't know. But I'll tell you this: it's not going to happen on time. Most likely, it's not going to happen with the same type of unity. It's not going to happen with the same type of fluidity. Why? Because the project is $100,000 short. They might have to skimp on part of the vision. They may not be able to set up maybe they part of it was a homeless shelter. Now they can't set up the homeless shelter, and so it's very, honestly, this is a very practical, black and white, easy to understand issue, and I think you can over spiritualize this and presume that, well, God's God and everything's just going to come together, and the idea that leaders lean on people, people don't like that, where leaders expect and need because of God's design, need people to participate in a radical way. People don't like that, and but people don't mind, honestly, people don't mind using the church or using the pastor and getting mad if the pastor doesn't come through, but they don't like it when the pastor's calling them to action. And so anyway, it's just a very, very interesting concept. And of course, there's a whole lot of discussion on this. I just finished my book, Pharaoh in the Church, where I talk about pastors using people is so radically wrong. And so pastors are in a very unique, pastors and leaders, very unique place where they are given a mandate from God. They are called to cast the vision. They are, in order for them to follow through and to see the mandate from God come to pass as planned, the pastor is completely reliant on other people's response to God's call to participate. And so the pastor is in a very tough situation where God is holding him accountable, yet he doesn't want to control or manipulate people, yet he does want people to respond as those who are accountable. And so it's a very challenging thing, but that's part of my ministry, is just to cast this vision of reformation in the church. And if you are out of position, if you are not tithing, if you're not giving, if you're not ministering in the place that you're supposed to be, if you're not praying, if you're not interceding, all of these kinds of things, whatever it is that God has called you to do, then just understand that there are lives that are made worse because of that. And I don't want this to be a heavy type of a thing, but it is heavy. It's very, very heavy. There are people's lives that are made worse because I do not do what I'm supposed to do, or their lives are made better because I do what I'm supposed to do. Just very, very simple, and should be very practical to understand. So anyway, yeah, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts, what you think about this. I think we need to see more accountability in the church. We need to see a ramping up of participation in the 24/7 church. We've got to grab hold of that. We need to, pastors need to stop taking on the role of salesmen, where they're just trying to sell this thing and trying to convince people to show up and trying to convince people to give. We need to get beyond that, where pastors just simply know that everyone's on board, all hands on deck, whatever the call, people are going to embrace that and going to respond. And so now we can focus on actually getting the job done. So, yep, there you go. And let me know what you think. Email me, john@johnburton.net. All right, bye.